My name is Sheila Hackbarth. I am an entrepreneur, newly formed entrepreneur. Although I shouldn't say that. I've been dabbling in art, pretty much in writing my entire adult life. But now, more recently, as I've started a consulting agency and doing more with my art, I'm full on in the entrepreneurial mode. So I'm excited to be here and chat with you about it.
Give me a short 30-second-ish pitch on what your consulting agency is. What's the background of it? What does it offer?
Absolutely. A good chunk of my corporate career has been in wine and spirits and corporately working for Moet Hennessy, which is the MH of LVMH for 24 years. My expertise is probably second to none in that industry, ranging from marketing, sales executive, education, training, developing talent. And so I want to take that, double decades worth of knowledge and institutional knowledge, contacts, understanding the business, the ebbs and flows, having gone through a couple of recessions, disastrous things like 9/11. I understand how the business operates and what it needs in various conditions, the good conditions and sometimes the more challenging conditions. And I want to take that and dig into it on my own terms, so to speak. And so I welcome this new challenge and chapter. So any company looking for support and understanding every element of the wine and spirits business, whether it's the three-tiered system, whether it's how to really cultivate a partnership with your wholesalers and your distributors across the country, launching new brands, developing a team, maybe looking at how to structure more efficiently, more effectively, and embrace the people and the brands is really something that I think I can offer to any company, whether it's a startup. We know that in wine and spirits, ready to drink, low and no. That means
Mhm.
low alcohol or no alcohol items are really, really emerging right now. So, I could help support any range in wine and spirits, or even consumer goods and luxury goods, because a lot of that is transferable.
And one of the things that I know really that I found really fascinating about your background is how deep of a background experience education you have with like fine art, not just fine wine and fine goods, right? Tell me a little bit about that, about your not only your education and background in it, but just your interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's always been at the center of my essence is creativity comes in all forms. It doesn't have to be that traditional artist, author, writing sense. And so I've always held on to that, even though I've enjoyed a very exciting corporate career in luxury wine and spirits, in the corporate space, in the executive space. There was always something within me and tugging at me when it came to that more traditional creativity, when it came to art, when it came to writing and reading. And that's so much a part of who we are as human beings, that I always honored it. And so whether it's collecting, I love supporting other artists. I'd love to welcome you into my home one day, Chris. So if you're ever in the Bay Area and you come into my home, there's artwork from every form to paintings, to multimedia, to watercolors, to sculptures, you name it, it's throughout my home. And so I think art really nurtures your spirit. And so I love to collect. I love to support artists of all ranges and all mediums. And then the other art form that I love is books. And reading is extremely important in society. And so the more you read, the more you're going to be connected with one another, with society, with people you don't know or places you've never been. So every art form I welcome, and I think it has to be essential to kind of who we are as people.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the book you wrote, the children's book, Lion's Water, which my two younger sons uh, got into an argument about some of the plot points and their interpretation of it. So it was really it was very engaging and riveting, and was a great and courageous thing you did, which was kind of putting that story out there. Um, it reminds me of some of the conversations we had, and also a little bit about my path to entrepreneurship, because my background's more technical. I was an engineer in the Navy. I transitioned into the law. I had, a lot of technical or specialized experience that didn't necessarily lend itself to creativity. It was very procedural based. But where I had the opportunity to innovate, I always was really drawn to that, and I looked for those opportunities. When I was looking to make a big professional pivot, entrepreneurship was the offered that sort of that space to create, to have almost unlimited freedom to experiment and innovate. I learned very quickly it required some vulnerability, putting your ideas out there, learning to be comfortable with failure. And I think in the conversations we've had, especially in, the kind of the path you took, just taking that risk and writing your own children's book and publishing it, um, I really wanted to be able to share sort of your thoughts and mine on how the artist and the entrepreneur share a lot of qualities, and how one can inform the other, especially finding that X factor that the entrepreneur and the artist can cultivate to help make them more successful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's so many similarities as an artist or a creative person and an entrepreneur. It always starts off as a very lonely solo journey, right? You're either creating a new concept, a product that no one's, the market didn't know it needed, right? As an artist, you're creating something from nothing. So, it's a very solo experience, but I think they all end on a pathway to cultivating community, right? What are you providing? How are you connecting with people? And so the journeys to me are very, very similar. You talk about rejection. Any creative, but particularly artists, authors, probably have maybe, actors and actresses, if you want to go there. There's probably so much rejection. You have a lifetime full of rejection when it comes to that. And that helps to seed something in you, right? It either is going to tear you down and stop you in your tracks, or it's going to propel you forward. And I think if artists and entrepreneurs break through that kind of rejection and uncertainty and doubt, self-doubt, sometimes doubt from others, if they can break through that and then have this moment of self-reflection, and then ultimately you can either reinvent yourself, reinvent the product, and take that and use that to your advantage, and take you further than you ever thought you could go. So for me, there's a lot of similarities. Absolutely.
Yeah, and what you're describing, that's sort of the classic pivot, the rejection as an opportunity for reflection and redirection is exactly kind of what the pivot is, where you have your MVP, you have your idea of what your service is, and it's maybe not quite what everybody wants or needs, or maybe there is something you didn't think about or something, right? The whole idea of fail fast so that you can learn is, that is the pivot. And I think that is equally applicable to, say, the painter who has that vision of what the painting should be, and it's maybe not what's going to resonate with people, but in painting again and painting again, they might, they're going to get to something that really wows the public. All right, I want to go back to something you said about the loneliness, at least in the beginning of the journey, and it makes me think about sort of like maybe, the classic example is that tech entrepreneur who is the only person who sees that their
Vision.
widget is going to be the thing. What has your experience been, and what are some of your thoughts on, like, how do you cope with being the only one that sees it, whether you're the only person that sees the statue that's in the marble, or you're the only person that sees why this widget is going to, thrive in the consumer marketplace.
Yeah, it's a little hard to explain, Chris, and I think that people either have it um, or they don't. It has to be a seed, I think, within you that is nurtured and prepared for all of the tough times, and will stop at nothing to see that it grows and that it flourishes. It's a hard thing to learn. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but that solitude is something that should be that should propel you versus stop you, as I said earlier. So you've got to have this drive that is not often seen. And so I'll give you a couple of examples,
Mhm.
because for me, that creativity is something that has always been within me. And I'm finding that I'm really embracing it now, especially being in corporate America for 20, actually over 24 years, but 24 years with my last company. You encounter rejection, whether you get passed over for a promotion, or a proposal doesn't land with a client, but it's not the same level of rejection. And for me personally, I think I had a really small appetite for rejection in the corporate space. It was always about, how do I do more? How do I perform better? But it was always for something else or someone else or a brand, not ever for myself. And so I think as artists and entrepreneurs and creatives, it has to be something internally that propels you, and not something externally, like a job or a promotion, or the title that you were hoping for. So it's internal versus external. And so when you have to be comfortable with that solitude, the idea starts in probably solitude, but solitude in a good way, if that makes sense. But the journey starts to bring and gather a sense of community and people along, and you've either solved a problem or a need, that, again, like I said, that people never knew they had. And then when it comes to art and creativity, you're creating something beautiful or thought-provoking, and now you're starting to enter people into that equation and become part of your idea, your vision, even your artwork itself. And so if, as an entrepreneur, you see what you're creating and your vision as art, eventually that solitude will turn and blossom and flourish into something so much bigger than you, and that solitude will bring in the world.
And I think that it also kind of speaks to why, um, to be a successful artist, to be a successful creative, to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be committed to the craft.
Mhm.
You have to have a passion for the craft. Otherwise, you're not going to put up with it, because rejection sucks. It
Yep.
hurts. I don't like it. I know that it is a fact of life, and if you're creating something new, I view that as like you're taking a huge risk, because no one has said, "Oh, I need this."
Mhm.
No one said they needed the iPhone, and then Steve Jobs said, "Oh, okay, I'll invent it."
Yeah.
No one said we needed
The Mona
the
Lisa.
Mona Lisa, but Da Vinci painted it, and
Yeah.
no one said we needed Romeo and Juliet, but Shakespeare wrote it. There's a lot of, uh, I think there's a lot of risk, a lot of, personal risk, not just, financial. But there's a lot of personal risk, because you could flop, you could fall flat on your face. In my own experience, and definitely in my clients' experience, there's a lot of naysayers along the way, or a lot of doubters, or a lot of people who say, "Are you sure you really want to do that?"
Yeah.
And I think that what you're getting at too is, this you have to be comfortable with that risk. You have to be comfortable with that rejection. And that rejection is really just an educational opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think there's maybe a little more so than in corporate America, or a lot more so actually, that iterative process. We talked about that in earlier discussions, and um, revisiting, reinventing, redirection. But I think you mentioned failure. We talked about the children's book, Lion's Water. I can't even I lost count of how many times I rewrote and revised and tinkered and tweaked. I can't tell you how many times people said, I don't think that this is something people will want to read. It's such a small audience. And if I stopped every time I questioned that, then the book wouldn't live now. And there's been so much joy that it's brought people. So I think as an entrepreneur, whether that the next big idea, if you don't believe in yourself and you don't fail probably multiple times, then it won't come to life. And so you got to get used to that rejection and you have to push through. But it is, like you said, an opportunity to educate, to learn, to reinvent, to redo, to throw it away and start all over. That happens a lot too.
Talk to me about something you said previously about expression is a way to chip away at the fear.
I don't think I've ever met an author or an artist, or even an entrepreneur for that matter, that didn't have at least some sense of fear. Maybe not fear of failure, but that self-doubt might creep in, and you've gotta push through it. And so, I think everyone's different, so I can't describe, what fear, they might be feeling. But for me, it's especially when it comes to my art, because it's so personal. When you said it's such a vulnerable thing, you want to make sure that what you're creating, there's a hunger for it, or you're healing, or you're having someone see something they've never saw, or brings a smile to their face. But that takes a lot of vulnerability, because what if they hate it? What if no one saw, no one bought any of my books? No one enjoyed reading my books, or my art. And so, yeah, you have to move through that fear, but you can't let that fear garner you like paralyzed, and you can't move.
Mhm.
So I think you need to embrace that fear, same as you embrace rejection. It's part of the process.
Yeah, it's a saying I heard long ago, and I thought it was great to put things like that in perspective. That you can't have the sweet without the sour. The highs have to have lows, and I think what we're talking about here is the lows. But the highs, I think you're also touching on here is like when your creation resonates.
Mhm.
That's really where the passion that you have, either to share your vision or to create something new that will add value, whether that's, more convenience in people's lives or joy in people's lives, that passion, like if you have that passion, if you identified that passion, then you're probably on the right track. I'd be interested to hear your experiences with that and kind of like this notion of as quantifiable as business is, so much of it begins with, well, it just felt right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're tapping into that instinct, right? Instinct
Mm,
is something that everyone has. Whether or not they use that muscle enough to understand what to listen to and what not to listen to. We talk to ourselves a lot in our heads, and sadly, sometimes it's a lot of negativity things like, "Hey, this isn't any good. What am I thinking? They won't like it. This won't work." But instinct is kind of, I guess, the antidote to that is, okay, what is your body? What is your head? What is your instinct telling you? And you've got to tap into that as an artist, as a creative, as an entrepreneur, because that is, I think, part of that seed that I mentioned earlier, part of what is internally in you that is going to push that passion, going to push you through courage, going to push you past the rejection and bring this to light. But I think maybe one of the commonalities between an entrepreneur and an artist that we haven't talked about, or we did, but we didn't tie it together, is ultimately it starts off in solitude, but that connection to another human being, whether you mentioned Steve Jobs, like I know iPhones are probably overused right now. Kids, are on their devices too much.
mm.
But can you think of the time before iPhones and now how connected people are and could use it for good? And do you remember your first time seeing a form of art, whether it's, a painting or a book you read that just feels like it transported you. Or even, I remember the first time I saw, the Cirque du Soleil,
Mhm.
and it was transformative. I'm like, this is amazing. I felt like I was in a different world. I felt like my body was connected to all of these moving pieces and people, and even the people in the audience and how they felt like. So when you connect to something in such a visceral way, you'll never forget it. That is kind of the bridge to that solitude. And when you connect with someone, whether it's one person or billions of people, like with the iPhone, maybe not all at once, but it's an experience like no other, right? And so that connection brings it full circle, and all of it comes together: the rejection, the courage, the passion, everything that you put into that. It makes it all worth it, and you feel it in a way that will transform you and
No,
transcend you into a different version of you.
well, and I think that's a great point. The emotional connection is not just about co-founder between co-founders or between artists or even just between an artist and like a writer and a publisher. It's really to for the art, for the business, for the product, for whatever you're creating to be successful, there has to be that emotional connection that either prompts someone to buy it, prompts someone to read it, prompts someone to look at it, right? I mean, there's an emotional connection between reader and writer,
Mhm.
emotional connection between entrepreneur and consumer. Focusing on the emotional connection that your product, your painting, your book is going to create is a way that, I mean, that's differentiation. You could argue the marketplace has never been more flooded in every category. Well, I mean, there was no MBA class I took that was on emotional connection.
Maybe there should be, Chris.
Maybe there should be. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some marketing electives that would have touched on it, but that's something that I certainly find that when I have clients who are trying to come up with their pitch,
Mhm.
I'll use words like, well, how's that going to resonate? Or things like that. But really what like when you deconstruct it, right, we're talking about the emotional connection, right?
Mhm.
I mean, what was it like writing your book and trying to like, how did that factor in?
I think in the creative process, you're not thinking about that. At least I wasn't when I was creating the book. I wanted to tell a story, and I wanted it to mean something, and it had to mean something to me first.
Hmm.
And then when I shared it with the world, I did going back to instinct, I did instinctually know that this will help heal and guide and connect people together. I knew it. I knew it in my heart. I knew it. I just knew it, right? But for me, it had to do those things for me first. And again, that's that belief, that passion, that courage. You have to have it in order to be able to birth or bring something into the world. So I think that has to come from within.
I think that was great advice on at least where this building the emotional connection starts. It's got to
Mhm.
mean something to
Yeah.
you. Bringing an entrepreneur example into it, a client of mine, exited his company last year. It was very successful exit. He built that up over 2 years. Everyone was really thrilled that it went through. And then he got the itch again. When I asked him, well, why are you going to start this journey all over again from the beginning? It was very simple. It's like, because I love this.
Yeah.
And he's talking he's talking about a personal AI that emphasizes privacy, but that passion was obvious. It was there, and it was no hesitation in his voice. Well, because I love this, and I think that's gets at the heart of what you're saying is it's got to mean something to you. If it doesn't mean something to you, like I'm not going to go out and do real estate law. It doesn't mean much to me. I mean, it doesn't like I don't love that. I'm not fired up by that. If you don't love what you're creating, no one's going to connect emotionally with it. You're almost baking in resentment.
Absolutely. And I think it starts internally, and as we mentioned, it ends externally, and you're bringing in people into that world, into that connection. So when you start to see, either as an entrepreneur, for me personally, when the book was finished and published, and people were reading it, and I was starting to get flooded with texts and emails about how much it touched, it was touching, you mentioned your story about your children, like digging into the plot, and that's awesome. But I remember one of the most, I wouldn't say it was the most meaningful, but I think it was a bit surprising to me. It was a mom who had read the book to her kids. It really resonated with the daughter. And then she said she was moved to tears because the book is very much about finding your inner strength and then believing in yourself, which is also very entrepreneurial mantra.
Yes.
But she said it reminded her as a woman, as a mother, like the inner child in her, and how, even as adults, we tend to have self-doubt and need to remember to believe in ourselves, and the power that we hold within. So I never in a million years had thought that this book would touch and speak to adults the way that it would for children. And so sometimes your art or your entrepreneur, what you're bringing to the world, surprises you and delights you and your customers and your consumers in ways that you had never imagined. So when you get a little taste of that and you see what you've brought and how it's impacting the people that it touches, then you want more of that,
Mhm.
right?
And I think that's the passion, right? That's the seed that you were talking about.
Mhm.
You go through the fear, you go through the rejection, you make your pivots, you hone your craft, because when you make that connection, when what you love resonates with another human being, that connection, that reader-writer connection, that consumer entrepreneur connection, that's it, right? That's the end game.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why you do it. I want to touch on two things. Let's talk about the balance between structured plans versus spontaneous innovation.
I love this because I see myself as two versions of me. The corporate version was like get shit done, make things happen, lead incredible teams, do amazing things. But I had a very small appetite for fear and for failure and spontaneity.
Mhm.
So with entrepreneurs, it's almost this freedom to be able to say, I'm gonna figure this out, right? And sometimes it has to be structured, right? You have to know your brand, you have to know your vision, and there needs to be structure around that. There needs to be discipline and how much time you put towards it. And sometimes you don't sleep. So there's that, but then there also has to be this kind of serendipitous moments that you experience, right? And as I mentioned, like if I have to, I was starting a painting, it was multimedia, and I had this idea in my head, and I wouldn't say it was halfway through, but I was probably close to halfway through, and I'm like, it just isn't right. And I just started all over. And so I imagine that entrepreneurs do the same thing. And that original idea that you had is going to be far better when you infuse some or you allow that spontaneity to happen. Because that's when the magic happens, so to speak, and you really find something that you weren't really even looking for, but it's better than what you had ever even imagined.
The balance is having, you have to have a plan, and you have to have preparation, but you have to make room for the happy accidents that
Yes.
are going to open your eyes to new possibilities. I'll tell clients, especially when they have like their companies are in their earlier stages, that you can't have a pivot unless you have a plan to pivot from.
Mm.
And and I think that knowing that, okay, I mean, even the painter has to go buy the paint and has to think in advance of, okay, what colors am I going to buy, and in what, I have to go, what kind of canvas am I going to get, right? So you have to, there's preparation, there's planning, but then you have to make room for spontaneity. What's the message you want people who can use your consulting services to hear?
What I know will set me apart and what I know will offer something that is unique in the consulting world, especially for wine and spirits and beyond. It's in the name of my company, Creative Abundance. creativity in all its forms. How you tackle a problem, how you look at your team, how if you're struggling with a product, the relationship you have with your wholesalers or different stakeholders in your company. Creativity should be infused in every action that you do, every problem every opportunity that comes forth. And I don't think the better part of businesses and people and even entrepreneurs look at creativity in its wholeness, right? It's everything. When we started talking, when we first had our first call, the conversation flowed and you ended upon entrepreneurship as art. And that's the essence of creativity. Like that spontaneity brought us to that point. And so, traditional consulting, is one thing, like how to get this done, how to get from point A to point B. But creativity has to be in the essence of everything that you do. And that is who I am. That's how I've always operated. And now to be able to bring that to other companies that maybe don't haven't exercised that muscle, I'm excited. I'm excited of how I can help and support brands, people, companies in a way that maybe we haven't quite looked at before.